To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, we'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Mask Falls. Bradley Knight stood motionless in the shadows of his own garage, watching through the kitchen window as his wife Stephanie laughed with a man he'd never seen before. 23 years of marriage, and she was serving coffee to a stranger in his home while their daughter Kelly sat at the breakfast table, seemingly comfortable with this arrangement. The stranger wore tattered clothes, a worn military jacket, faded jeans with holes, and boots that had seen better days. His hair was unkempt, beard patchy, and he carried himself with the defeated posture of someone life had beaten down. Every inch of him screamed homeless veteran, the kind of man who'd slipped through society's cracks. But Bradley Knight hadn't survived 2 tours in Afghanistan and built a successful security consulting business by taking things at face value. Something about the man's eyes didn't match his appearance. Too sharp, too calculating for someone supposedly broken by life. Bradley had returned early from his business trip to Denver, wanting to surprise Stephanie for their anniversary. The surprise was on him instead. He'd parked down the street and approached through the back alley, a habit from his military days that had served him well in business negotiations. Always scout the terrain first. "Mom, are you sure about this?" Kelly's voice drifted through the slightly open window. At 17, their daughter had inherited her mother's auburn hair and Bradley's piercing blue eyes that now showed concern. "Eddie's been through enough, sweetheart," Stephanie replied, her voice softer than Bradley had heard it in months. "The least we can do is help him get back on his feet." Eddie. So the stranger had a name. Bradley pulled out his phone and began recording, though he kept the device hidden. In his line of work, documentation was everything. "I just don't want Dad to freak out when he gets back tomorrow," Kelly continued. "Your father will understand," Stephanie said, but Bradley caught the slight hesitation in her voice. "Eddie served his country, just like Dad did. We help our veterans." Eddie Alexander. Bradley caught the full name when Stephanie handed him what looked like mail, spoke for the first time. His voice was rough, gravelly, playing the part perfectly. "I can't thank you enough, Steph. After losing everything, having someone believe in me again." The intimacy in his tone when he said her name made Bradley's jaw clench. This wasn't charity. This was something else entirely. Bradley watched as Eddie reached across the table and briefly touched Stephanie's hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she glanced toward the hallway leading to their bedroom, and some unspoken communication passed between them. "Kelly, honey, why don't you head to school a little early today?" Stephanie suggested. "I need to help Eddie with some paperwork for the VA." Bradley's daughter gathered her backpack, clearly uncomfortable but obedient. She kissed her mother's cheek and nodded politely at Eddie before heading toward the front door. The moment Kelly's car pulled out of the driveway, the dynamic in the kitchen shifted. Eddie's posture straightened slightly, and Stephanie moved her chair closer to his. Bradley continued recording as his wife of 23 years leaned in and kissed another man. It wasn't a quick, guilty peck. It was deep, passionate, the kind of kiss that spoke of familiarity and longing. When they broke apart, Eddie's hand was already moving toward the buttons of Stephanie's blouse. "Upstairs," she whispered. Bradley had seen enough for now. He backed away from the window and returned to his car, mind already working through the implications. His wife was having an affair with a supposed homeless veteran, and their daughter seemed to know something was going on, even if she didn't understand the full extent. But something felt off about the entire situation. Eddie Alexander might be playing the part of a down-and-out veteran, but Bradley recognized predatory behavior when he saw it. This man was hunting, not surviving. Bradley drove to his office downtown, a modest suite in a converted warehouse that served as headquarters for Knight Security Solutions. His team of former military personnel handled everything from corporate espionage prevention to personal protection for high-profile clients. They were good at their jobs because Bradley had taught them the first rule of survival: trust no one completely, verify everything. His assistant, Miguel Bond, looked up from his desk as Bradley entered. Miguel had served under Bradley in Afghanistan and lost his left leg to an IED. He was one of the few people Bradley trusted completely. "Thought you weren't due back until tomorrow, boss." Change of plans. Bradley headed straight for his private office. "Miguel, I need you to run a deep background check on someone. Name's Eddie Alexander. Claims to be a homeless veteran. probably in his late 30s, early 40s. Miguel's expression grew serious. He knew that tone. How deep? Every record that exists. Military service, if any. Criminal history, financial records, known associates. I want to know what he had for breakfast 5 years ago. Personal matter? Bradley paused at his office door. Miguel had earned the right to ask direct questions. He's in my house. That was all Miguel needed to hear. I'll have something by end of day. Bradley spent the morning reviewing security proposals, but his mind kept drifting to the scene in his kitchen. Stephanie's behavior hadn't just been that of a guilty wife caught in an affair. She'd seemed different, more alive than she'd been in years. When had they grown so far apart? The business had consumed more and more of his time, and Stephanie had grown increasingly distant. They'd stopped talking about anything meaningful, stopped sharing the small moments that had once bound them together. But infidelity? He'd never imagined she was capable of that level of betrayal. Around noon, his phone buzzed with a text from Stephanie. Hope your trip is going well. Love you. The casual lie stung more than he'd expected. She was covering her tracks, maintaining the fiction that he was still in Denver while she played house with another man. Bradley typed back, long day ahead. Love you too. Two could play this game. By evening, Miguel had preliminary results. Boss, we might have a problem. Bradley looked up from the surveillance photos Miguel had spread across his desk. Images of Eddie Alexander entering and leaving various locations around the city over the past month. Eddie Alexander is real, Miguel continued. But he's not homeless, and he's not a veteran. Real name's Edmund Alexander, and he's got a record as long as my arm. Con artist, fraud, identity theft. Been working the veteran sympathy angle for about 3 years now. Military service? None whatsoever. Never served a day in his life. Miguel pulled up more files on his laptop. He targets middle-class women, usually married, usually with some connection to the military community. Poses as a down-on-his-luck veteran, gets invited into their homes, and systematically drains their resources. Bradley studied the photos. In several, Eddie looked nothing like the broken man he'd seen in his kitchen. Clean-shaven, well-dressed, confident. How many victims? At least 6 that we can confirm over the past 2 years. Average take was around 50,000 per mark, though one woman in Phoenix lost nearly 200 grand before her family intervened. Current status of those cases? Most never reported it. Too embarrassed. The few that did press charges couldn't make them stick because the women had voluntarily given him access to their accounts. Bradley felt a cold fury building in his chest. This wasn't just adultery. His wife was being manipulated by a professional predator. But that didn't excuse her choices. She'd made the decision to betray their marriage, regardless of Eddie's methods. There's more, Miguel said quietly. I think he's been planning this for a while. Your wife's been making cash withdrawals for the past 2 months. Small amounts, nothing that would trigger bank alerts, but they add up. Nearly 15,000 so far. Bradley stared at the bank records Miguel had obtained through channels he preferred not to think about too closely. Stephanie had been careful, spreading the withdrawals across different ATMs, never taking more than 300 at a time. She's funding him, Bradley said. Looks that way. And boss, there's something else. I found surveillance footage from the VA office downtown. Your wife's been there with him, helping him apply for benefits he's not entitled to. That crossed a line from personal betrayal into criminal fraud. Stephanie wasn't just cheating, she was actively participating in Eddie's con game. Bradley closed the files and leaned back in his chair. His wife had chosen to betray him with a man who made his living destroying families. Their daughter was being exposed to a dangerous criminal, and Stephanie was helping commit federal fraud. The woman he'd married, the mother of his child, no longer existed. In her place was someone he didn't recognize, someone who needed to face consequences for her choices. Miguel, I want round-the-clock surveillance on both of them. Document everything. And start building a comprehensive profile on Edmund Alexander's methods. I want to understand exactly how he operates. Planning something specific? Bradley's smile was cold and empty. I'm going to give them exactly what they deserve. Chapter 2. The Hunter Becomes Hunted. 3 days of surveillance had painted a clear picture of Stephanie and Eddie's routine. They met every morning after Kelly left for school, sometimes at the house, sometimes at a motel on the outskirts of town. Eddie maintained his homeless veteran facade in public, but in private, he moved with the confidence of a man completely in control. Bradley sat in his office, studying the photographs and transcripts his team had compiled. Eddie wasn't just running a simple con. He was building towards something bigger. Bank records showed Stephanie had opened a new savings account without Bradley's knowledge, one that already contained $30,000. He's escalating, Miguel observed, pointing to the timeline they'd constructed. With the other victims, he never pushed this hard this fast. Usually took 6 months to get to this point. Bradley nodded, studying Eddie's pattern. The man was getting greedy or desperate. Maybe both. Any idea why? Could be he's being pressured. I found some interesting connections. Miguel pulled up a new file. Eddie's got gambling debts with some very unfriendly people. The kind who break kneecaps when payment schedules slip. That explained the acceleration. Eddie needed money fast, and Stephanie was his quickest path to it. But that also meant he was making mistakes, leaving openings that Bradley could exploit. How much does he owe? Best estimate? Around $200,000. And it's growing daily. Bradley felt a plan beginning to form. Eddie Alexander was trapped between two dangerous forces, his creditors and Bradley himself. The key was making sure Eddie never realized the second threat existed until it was too late. I want you to make contact with his creditors, Bradley instructed. Not directly. Use intermediaries. Let them know Eddie's working a new mark, but suggest he might be planning to skip town. Miguel's expression showed he understood the implications. That'll put pressure on them to collect. Exactly. And desperate men make mistakes. Bradley closed the files. Meanwhile, I'm going to have a conversation with my daughter. Kelly was in her room when Bradley returned home that evening, ostensibly still on his business trip. He'd parked several blocks away and entered through the back door, moving quietly through his own house like an intruder. Stephanie was in the shower. He could hear the water running, and likely didn't expect him until the next day. Perfect timing for what he needed to do. He knocked softly on Kelly's door. Hey, sweetheart. Dad. Kelly looked up from her homework, surprised but pleased. I thought you weren't coming back until tomorrow. Flight got moved up. Bradley closed the door behind him and sat on the edge of her bed. I need to ask you about something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. His daughter's expression grew wary. At 17, she was old enough to sense when adult conversations carried weight. What do you know about Eddie? Bradley asked quietly. Kelly's face flushed, and she looked away. Mom said he's a veteran who needed help. But what do you think? The question hung in the air for a long moment. Finally, Kelly met his eyes. I think Mom's lying to both of us. Bradley had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed still stung. What makes you say that? She acts different when he's around. Happy but also guilty. And she's been asking me to stay late at school or go to friends' houses. She's never done that before. Kelly's voice dropped to a whisper. And yesterday, I came home early because I forgot my science project. They were in your bedroom, Dad. The words hit Bradley like a physical blow, but he kept his expression neutral. His daughter was already carrying enough guilt without seeing her father's pain. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want to hurt you. And because I was afraid of what you'd do. That gave Bradley pause. What do you mean? Kelly's eyes searched his face. You're not like other dads. When someone hurts you, you don't just get mad. You get even. And you're really good at it. His daughter knew him better than he'd realized. Would that be such a bad thing? I don't know. Maybe Mom deserves whatever you're planning. But I'm scared it'll destroy our family completely. Bradley reached out and took her hand. Kelly, what's happening between your mother and me? That's not your fault, and it's not your responsibility to fix. But I need you to understand something. The man your mother is involved with isn't who he claims to be. He pulled out his phone and showed her several of Miguel's photographs. Images of Eddie in expensive clothes, entering luxury hotels. Clearly not the homeless veteran he pretended to be. Kelly's eyes widened. He's been lying? About everything. He's a criminal who targets military families. He's using your mother, and he's put our entire family at risk. Does Mom know? I don't think so. But that doesn't excuse her choices. Bradley put his phone away. I need you to trust me, and I need you to be very careful around both of them until this is resolved. What are you going to do? Bradley stood and kissed the top of her head. I'm going to protect our family. But Kelly, some choices have permanent consequences. Your mother made hers when she decided to betray our marriage. Whatever happens next, remember that. The shower had stopped running. Bradley heard Stephanie moving around in their bedroom, and he knew he needed to leave before she discovered him home early. Not a word about this conversation, he warned his daughter. And if Eddie or your mother ask you to do anything that makes you uncomfortable, you call me immediately. Kelly nodded, but her expression was troubled. Dad, do you still love Mom? The question caught him off guard. Did he? The woman he'd married, the one who'd stood by him through deployments and PTSD episodes, the one who'd built a life with him. Yes, he still loved that person. But that person might not exist anymore. I love the woman I married, he said finally. But I don't know if she's the same person making these choices now. Bradley slipped out of the house the same way he'd entered, but not before planting several microcameras in strategic locations. If Stephanie and Eddie were planning something that could hurt Kelly, he needed to know about it in advance. Back at his car, he received a text from Miguel. Eddie's meeting with creditors tomorrow night. Warehouse District. Want surveillance? Bradley typed back, no, I want to attend. The next evening, Bradley watched from the shadows of an abandoned loading dock as Eddie Alexander walked nervously into a warehouse meeting. 3 men waited for him, leg breakers who looked like they'd stepped out of a crime film. Through his earpiece, Bradley listened to Miguel's commentary from a surveillance van. A lot of nervous energy in there. Eddie's sweating. The conversation inside was brief and heated. Eddie promised payment within the week, claimed he had a sure thing lined up. The creditors weren't impressed. One of them, a massive man with arms like tree trunks, grabbed Eddie by the shirt and lifted him off his feet. 1 week, the man growled. Then we start breaking things. After Eddie left, Bradley followed him to a bar downtown. The man ordered 3 shots of whiskey in quick succession, hands shaking as he drank. Whatever confidence he'd shown with Stephanie was completely absent now. Bradley entered the bar and took a seat 2 stools down from Eddie. In his worn jeans and baseball cap, he looked like any other blue-collar worker stopping for a drink after work. Rough day? Bradley asked casually. Eddie glanced at him, then nodded. You could say that. I know the feeling. Lost my job last month. Wife's about ready to leave me. Bradley signaled the bartender for a beer. Sometimes feels like the whole world's against you, you know? Yeah. Eddie seemed to relax slightly, perhaps seeing a kindred spirit. Things just keep getting worse. Got any prospects? Work-wise, I mean. Eddie's laugh was bitter. Working on something. Should pay off big if it comes through. What kind of work? For a moment, Eddie seemed to consider whether to answer. Then the alcohol made the decision for him. Let's just say some people got more money than they know what to do with. And some of them are generous to the right sob story. Bradley nodded sympathetically. Lucky you. Wish I could find someone like that. It's all about the presentation, Eddie said, warming to the subject. People want to feel good about themselves. Give them a chance to be the hero in someone else's story, and they'll open their wallets every time. Sounds like you got it figured out. Eddie's expression darkened. Not as well as I thought. Sometimes the well runs dry faster than expected. They drank in silence for a few minutes. Then Bradley made his move. You know, if you ever need a partner for whatever you're working on, I might be interested. I mean, if the money's good. Eddie studied him more carefully. What kind of experience you got? Military. Special forces. Good with electronics, security systems, that kind of thing. All true, though Bradley left out the part about running his own security company. And I got nothing left to lose. Interesting. Eddie pulled out his phone and showed Bradley a photo. Stephanie, standing in front of their house. This lady's been very generous. But I think she's got a lot more to offer. Seeing his wife's photo in Eddie's phone ignited a cold fury in Bradley's chest, but he kept his expression neutral. Nice-looking woman. Married. Husband travels a lot for business. Military contractor type. Real workaholic. Eddie's tone held contempt. She's lonely, looking for someone who appreciates her. And you're that someone? For now? But I'm thinking there might be more to squeeze out of this situation. Big house, nice neighborhood. Woman like that probably has access to serious money. Bradley took another sip of beer, fighting the urge to break Eddie's neck right there at the bar. What are you thinking? Maybe it's time to up the stakes. Stop playing small time and go for the real prize. Which is? Eddie leaned closer, whiskey making him careless. Her husband's got a business. Security company. Probably pulling in serious cash, and she's got access to the accounts. Sounds risky. Everything worthwhile is risky, but I got her wrapped around my finger. She'd do anything for me right now. Eddie's smile was predatory, including helping me clean out her husband's business accounts. Bradley had heard enough. Eddie wasn't just planning to rob him. He was planning to use Stephanie to do it. His wife wasn't just a victim anymore. She was being groomed to become an accomplice in destroying everything Bradley had built. When you planning to make this move? Bradley asked. Soon. Real soon. I got some debts that need paying, and I can't wait much longer. Bradley finished his beer and stood up. Well, good luck with that. Hope it works out for you. As he walked away, Eddie called after him. Hey, if you're serious about partnering up, give me your number. I might have something for you. Bradley turned back and smiled. Thanks, but I think I'll pass. See, the thing about hunting is, you got to be careful you don't become the prey. Eddie's expression shifted, confusion replacing the drunken camaraderie. But Bradley was already walking away, disappearing into the crowd outside the bar. It was time to spring his trap. Chapter 3, Setting the Stage. The next morning, Bradley sat in a coffee shop across from the courthouse, watching lawyers and clerks hurry in and out of the building. In 2 hours, he would file for divorce from Stephanie. But first, he had one more piece to put in place. His phone buzzed with a text from Miguel. Package delivered. Eddie took the bait. The package contained a flash drive supposedly filled with insider information about Night Security Solutions' client list and financial records. In reality, it contained sophisticated malware that would give Bradley complete access to any device Eddie used it on. Eddie had received the drive from a supposed disgruntled employee of Bradley's company, actually one of Miguel's contacts playing a role. The story was simple. The employee was angry about being passed over for promotion and wanted to sell information that could help Eddie maximize his take from the Knight family. By now, Eddie would have inserted the drive into his laptop, giving Bradley access to everything: emails, financial records, communications with his criminal contacts, and most importantly, his plans for Stephanie. Bradley's phone rang. Jeff Rogers, his attorney and an old army buddy, was calling with an update. Divorce papers are ready, Jeff said. You sure you want to go this route? Once we file, there's no walking it back quietly. I'm sure. What about the other matter? Criminal complaint is drafted and ready to go. FBI's interested in the veterans benefits fraud angle. Your wife's involvement complicates things, but if she's willing to cooperate. She won't be, Bradley interrupted. Stephanie's in too deep to turn on him now. She'll choose him over the truth. That's a hell of a gamble, Bradley. If you're wrong about her, you could be destroying an innocent woman. Bradley thought about the photographs Miguel had taken the previous day, Stephanie and Eddie visiting banks together, Eddie coaching her on what to say. She was past the point of innocent victim. Jeff, I need you to understand something. My wife isn't the woman I married anymore. She's made choices that put our daughter at risk and threatened everything I've built. I can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. And if she fights the divorce, she will. But by then, it won't matter. After hanging up, Bradley drove to his office to review the intelligence Miguel had gathered from Eddie's compromised laptop. The information painted a disturbing picture of escalation and desperation. Eddie had indeed been planning to push Stephanie toward accessing Bradley's business accounts. More troubling, he'd been researching Bradley himself, trying to determine when he'd be out of town for extended periods. The man was planning something that required Bradley to be absent for several days. He's been in contact with 2 other men, Miguel reported, pulling up email chains. Names are Brett Herrera and Wade Cardenas. Both have records for burglary and armed robbery. Bradley studied the messages. He's planning to rob the house. Looks that way, but not until after he gets your wife to drain the business accounts. He wants everything at once. Timeline. Based on these messages, sometime in the next week. He's told them about your daughter's schedule, security system details, even where you keep your guns safe. The violation of his family's privacy and safety pushed Bradley's anger past the boiling point. Eddie wasn't just stealing money. He was planning to invade their home, potentially putting Kelly in danger. Change of plans, Bradley said quietly. We're not waiting for the divorce proceedings. We're ending this now. What do you have in mind? Bradley pulled up building schematics on his computer. Eddie's meeting his associates tomorrow night to finalize their plans. I want to be there. Boss, if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, I'm not going to kill him, Miguel, but I am going to make sure he never threatens another family. Bradley's smile was cold. Sometimes the best way to stop a predator is to show him what real prey looks like. That evening, Bradley returned home openly for the first time since discovering the affair. Stephanie was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and her face lit up when she saw him. You're home early. She rushed to embrace him, and for a moment, Bradley almost believed the act. Almost. Missed my girls, he said, returning the hug while studying her face. She looked genuinely happy to see him, which made her betrayal even more painful. Kelly's upstairs doing homework. How was Denver? Productive. Landed a big contract. He pulled back slightly. We should celebrate. Take that vacation we've been talking about. Stephanie's smile faltered almost imperceptibly. That sounds wonderful, but maybe we should wait until summer? Kelly's got so much going on with school. I was thinking we could go soon. Next week, maybe. Bradley watched her reaction carefully. Just the two of us. Kelly could stay with your sister. Next week. Stephanie's voice rose slightly. That's so sudden. I have commitments. What kind of commitments? For a moment, Stephanie looked trapped. Then she recovered. Just volunteer work. Things I can't easily reschedule. Volunteer work. At the VA office. The color drained from Stephanie's face. How did you? Bradley didn't answer directly. Instead, he pulled out his phone and showed her one of Miguel's photographs, her and Eddie entering the VA building together. I know about Eddie, Stephanie. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Stephanie's mouth opened and closed several times before she found her voice. It's not what you think. Really? Then explain it to me. Stephanie sat down heavily at the kitchen table, her hands shaking. He's been through so much, Bradley. Lost everything in Afghanistan, came back to nothing. The system failed him. Eddie Alexander never served in Afghanistan. He never served anywhere. He's a con artist with a criminal record who targets military families. That's not true. But Stephanie's voice lacked conviction. Bradley sat across from her and pulled up Eddie's real background on his phone. His real name is Edmund Alexander. He's been arrested 6 times for fraud. He's stolen over $300,000 from women just like you over the past 3 years. Stephanie stared at the screen, her face cycling through shock, disbelief, and finally, a stubborn denial. Even if that's true, it doesn't change how I feel about him. The admission hit Bradley like a slap. She wasn't denying the affair. She wasn't expressing remorse. She was defending her choice to betray their marriage. How you feel about him? I love him, Bradley. The words came out in a rush. I know that hurts you, but I can't help it. He makes me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years. He's using you, Stephanie. Everything about him is a lie. So what if it is? At least he pays attention to me. At least he makes me feel wanted. Her voice grew stronger, more defiant. When was the last time you looked at me the way he does? When was the last time you made me feel like I mattered? Bradley felt something cold and final settle in his chest. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a mistake. Stephanie had chosen Eddie over their marriage, over their family, over reality itself. What about Kelly? Kelly will understand. She's almost 18 anyway. Kids adapt. You're willing to destroy our daughter's family for a criminal who's been lying to you since the day you met. I'm willing to finally be happy. Stephanie stood up, her chin raised defiantly. I want a divorce, Bradley. I'm done pretending. Bradley nodded slowly. Okay. Stephanie seemed surprised by his calm reaction. If that's what you want, then that's what you'll get. Bradley stood and headed toward the stairs. I'll be staying at the office for a few days while we figure out the logistics. Bradley, wait. Something in his tone must have warned her. I don't want this to be ugly. For Kelly's sake. Bradley paused at the bottom of the stairs and looked back at his wife. Stephanie, you just told me you're in love with a criminal who's been planning to rob our home and steal from my business. You've been helping him commit federal fraud. And you think our daughter will understand when her college fund disappears to pay for his gambling debts. That's not. He wouldn't. Ask him about the $200,000 he owes to some very dangerous people. Ask him about his plans for next week when I'm supposed to be out of town. Bradley's voice remained calm, which seemed to disturb Stephanie more than anger would have. But don't worry. You won't have to ask him anything for much longer. What do you mean? You made your choice, Stephanie. Now you get to live with the consequences. Bradley went upstairs to pack a bag, leaving his wife standing in the kitchen with the weight of her decisions finally beginning to crush down on her. Tomorrow night, he would end Eddie Alexander's career permanently. And after that, he would deal with Stephanie's betrayal in a way that would ensure she never forgot the cost of her choices. The game was almost over, and Bradley Knight always played to win. Chapter 4. The Warehouse. The abandoned warehouse squatted like a concrete cancer in the industrial district, surrounded by empty lots and rusted chain-link fencing. Bradley arrived 2 hours before the scheduled meeting, using the time to position surveillance equipment and plan his approach. Miguel's voice crackled through his earpiece. 3 vehicles approaching from the east. That's Eddie and his crew. Bradley watched from his perch in the warehouse rafters as Eddie Alexander entered with 2 other men, Brett Herrera and Wade Cardenas, both looking exactly like the career criminals their records suggested. They moved with the careful tension of men who expected violence but hoped to avoid it. "Where are the money men?" Brett asked, his voice echoing in the empty space. "They'll be here," Eddie replied, but his nervous energy suggested he wasn't entirely certain. Wade, a thin man with dead eyes and crude tattoos covering his arms, was examining the warehouse layout. "This place gives me the creeps. Too many blind spots." "It's perfect for what we need," Eddie insisted. "Once we get Bradley Knight out of town, we hit the house hard and fast. His wife's already transferred $40,000 to my account. She thinks it's for my medical expenses." Bradley's jaw clenched. Stephanie had given Eddie even more money than Miguel's surveillance had revealed. "40 grand ain't enough to cover what you owe," Brett said. "Boss man wants his full 200 plus interest." I know. But Knight's business accounts have at least $500,000. His wife's going to help me access them." "How?" Wade asked. Eddie pulled out his phone and showed them something on the screen. "She's got power of attorney for the business. Some legal thing they set up years ago in case he got deployed. She can authorize transfers without his signature." The power of attorney was real, a precaution Bradley had established during his military days. But Stephanie would need physical access to specific documents and security codes that Bradley kept in his home office safe. "So we don't just rob the house," Brett said slowly. "We kidnap the wife and kid, make them open everything up." "Exactly. Clean out the business accounts, grab anything valuable from the house, and disappear." Wade was shaking his head. "Kidnapping's federal time, Eddie. Way different from simple burglary. Only if we get caught. And we won't, because Knight will be 3,000 miles away when it happens." Bradley had heard enough. These men weren't just planning to rob him. They were planning to terrorize his family. Whatever mercy he might have shown Eddie evaporated in that moment. He activated his phone, sending a pre-written message to Miguel. "Execute plan. All units." The warehouse lights suddenly blazed to life, temporarily blinding the 3 men below. Before they could recover, smoke grenades deployed from hidden positions, filling the space with thick gray fog. Bradley rappelled down from the rafters, landing silently behind Wade. A single strike to the nerve cluster in his neck dropped the man instantly, unconscious before he hit the concrete floor. Brett spun around, trying to locate the threat through the smoke, but Bradley was already moving. The ex-soldier's training kicked in as he disarmed Brett with a textbook technique, leaving the man gasping on the ground with his arm twisted at an unnatural angle. That left Eddie, who was stumbling blindly through the smoke, coughing and calling for his associates. Bradley let him stumble for a few moments, savoring the man's panic. "Brett, wait, where are you guys?" Bradley stepped out of the smoke directly in front of Eddie. "They're indisposed." Eddie's eyes went wide with recognition and terror. You're supposed to be in Denver." "Change of plans." Bradley's voice was calm, conversational. "Turns out my wife's been very helpful in providing information about my travel schedule. Look, man, whatever you think you heard. I heard you planning to kidnap my wife and daughter. I heard you planning to rob my business. I heard you talking about my family like they were livestock to be butchered." Eddie raised his hands, backing away. "It wasn't serious. Just talk, you know? Guys bullshitting. The $40,000 my wife gave you. Was that just talk too?" Eddie's face crumpled as he realized the depth of his situation. "Please, I can explain everything. She came to me, man. I never forced her to do anything." "You're right about that." Bradley stepped closer. "She made her choices. But you made the mistake of threatening my daughter. I never would have hurt her. I swear to God, I would never hurt a kid. Your associates seemed to have different ideas." Behind them, Brett was groaning in pain while Wade remained unconscious. The smoke was beginning to clear, revealing the full extent of their predicament. "What do you want?" Eddie asked desperately. "Justice," Bradley replied. "But not the kind you get in a courtroom." Miguel's voice came through the earpiece. "Police en route. 2 minutes out." Bradley smiled at Eddie. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to confess to everything. The fraud, the theft, the planned kidnapping. You're going to provide a complete list of your victims and return every penny you've stolen. And if I don't, then your creditors receive an anonymous tip about where to find you, along with evidence that you've been skimming money that rightfully belongs to them. Eddie's face went white. You bastard. I'm also going to make sure every veterans organization in the country knows what you've been doing. Fake veterans don't last long in prison when word gets around. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Bradley had timed this perfectly. Eddie would be arrested on kidnapping and conspiracy charges, with Brett and Wade as witnesses to his confession. But here's the beautiful part, Bradley continued. Your trial is going to be very public. Every detail of your cons, every family you've destroyed, every lie you've told, it's all going to come out. Including your wife's involvement? Bradley's expression hardened. Especially my wife's involvement. The warehouse doors burst open as police officers flooded in, weapons drawn. Bradley raised his hands and identified himself, his credentials as a licensed security contractor providing immediate credibility. Detective Rogers? One of the officers recognized Jeff Rogers, who entered behind the police team. What's the situation? We received a tip about a planned kidnapping, Jeff explained. Mr. Knight here was conducting surveillance on the suspects when they arrived. The story was simple and mostly true. Bradley had been investigating Eddie's criminal activities, discovered the plot against his family, and set up surveillance to gather evidence. When the conspirators arrived and began discussing their plans in detail, he'd called for police backup. Eddie tried to protest, claiming entrapment and illegal surveillance. But his arguments fell apart when investigators found the detailed plans on his phone and laptop. The evidence of his criminal history and the testimony from Brett and Wade, both of whom quickly turned on Eddie to reduce their own charges, created an ironclad case. As Eddie was led away in handcuffs, he looked back at Bradley with pure hatred. This isn't over. Your wife made her choice. She chose me. Yes, Bradley agreed. She did. And now she gets to live with the consequences of that choice. The police processed the scene while Bradley provided his statement. By dawn, all three conspirators were in custody, facing federal charges that would ensure they spent decades in prison. But Eddie's arrest was only the beginning of Bradley's plan. The real reckoning was still to come. Chapter 5. Unraveling. Stephanie's world collapsed in stages. First came the phone call at 6 in the morning. Eddie had been arrested, charged with conspiracy to commit kidnapping and robbery. Then came the FBI agents at her door, asking pointed questions about her relationship with Edmund Alexander and her role in his fraudulent activities. Bradley watched from his car across the street as federal agents carried boxes of evidence from his former home. Stephanie stood in the doorway in her bathrobe, Kelly beside her, both looking shell-shocked. His phone buzzed with a text from Kelly. Dad, where are you? Mom needs you. He typed back, I'm exactly where I need to be. The investigation moved quickly once Eddie's laptop was analyzed. Every email, every plan, every lie was laid bare. The FBI had been tracking veterans' benefits fraud for months, and Eddie's case gave them everything they needed to shut down a nationwide network of fake veterans. Stephanie's involvement was initially treated as that of another victim, but her repeated visits to the VA office and her role in helping Eddie complete fraudulent applications painted a different picture. By the end of the week, she was facing federal charges of her own. Bradley received a call from his lawyer during the second day of the investigation. She wants to see you, Jeff reported. Says she needs to explain. There's nothing to explain. Bradley, I know you're angry, but think about this carefully. She's still Kelly's mother. Still your wife, legally speaking. If she goes to prison, then she goes to prison. Actions have consequences. What about Kelly? That gave Bradley pause. His daughter had been caught in the crossfire of her mother's choices, and she was the only innocent party in this entire mess. Kelly can live with me. She's almost 18 anyway. And if Stephanie fights for custody? With what? She's about to be a convicted felon who endangered our daughter by bringing a criminal into our home. Jeff sighed. Just consider talking to her. Find out what she's thinking. For Kelly's sake, if nothing else. That afternoon, Bradley sat across from his wife in the Federal Detention Center's visiting room. Stephanie looked like she'd aged 10 years in 3 days. Her auburn hair was pulled back severely, highlighting the dark circles under her eyes and the pallor of her skin. You set him up, she said without preamble. I stopped him before he could hurt our family. By destroying him. Bradley leaned forward. Stephanie, Eddie Alexander was planning to kidnap you and Kelly. He was going to torture both of you to get access to my business accounts. His associates were discussing whether to kill you afterward to eliminate witnesses. I don't believe that. The FBI has recordings, video evidence. His own words planning every detail. Stephanie's composure cracked slightly. He wouldn't have let them hurt us. You still don't understand, do you? Everything about Eddie was a lie. His name, his military service, his feelings for you. All of it was designed to manipulate you into giving him access to our lives. That's not true. What we had was real. Bradley felt that familiar cold anger settle in his chest. Even faced with overwhelming evidence, even sitting in a jail cell because of Eddie's lies, Stephanie still defended him. He stole $40,000 from you. He was planning to steal $500,000 more. He put recording devices in our bedroom and gave detailed floor plans of our house to armed criminals. You don't understand what it was like, Stephanie said, her voice rising. You were never there. Always working, always traveling. Eddie made me feel alive again. Eddie made you feel like a mark. Because that's what you were. I'm not some helpless victim, Bradley. I made my own choices. Yes, you did. And one of those choices was to help a criminal commit federal fraud. Another was to give him access to our daughter. Kelly was never in danger. Kelly was in the house when Eddie was casing it for his associates. She was part of their target list, Stephanie. They knew her schedule, her routines, where she slept. For the first time, doubt flickered across Stephanie's face. He said, he promised me that she would never be involved. And you believed him, just like you believed everything else he told you. They sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Stephanie spoke again, her voice smaller. What's going to happen to me? That depends on how much you cooperate with the investigation. And us? Our marriage. Bradley studied his wife's face, looking for any sign of genuine remorse, any indication that she understood the magnitude of her betrayal. Instead, he saw self-pity and a desperate hope that he would somehow fix the mess she'd created. There is no us, Stephanie. You ended our marriage the moment you chose Eddie over our family. I made a mistake. People make mistakes, Bradley. It doesn't have to mean the end of everything. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk from the store. A mistake is being late for dinner. What you did was make a conscious choice to betray everything we built together. So you'll never forgive me? No matter what. Bradley thought about the question seriously. Could he forgive her? Maybe, eventually, for his own peace of mind. But forgiveness didn't require reconciliation. It didn't erase consequences. Forgiveness and trust are different things, Stephanie. Even if I could forgive what you've done, I could never trust you again. And without trust, there's no marriage. What about Kelly? Kelly will always be our daughter. But she's old enough to understand that actions have consequences. She's old enough to choose which parent she wants to live with. Stephanie's eyes filled with tears. She'll choose you. She always has. Because I never abandoned our family for a stranger. The visit ended with nothing resolved. Stephanie returned to her cell to await trial, while Bradley went home to find Kelly waiting for him in the kitchen. How's Mom? She asked. Angry. Scared. Still defending Eddie. Kelly's face fell. I was hoping. I thought maybe seeing you would help her realize. Your mother has made her choices, sweetheart. The only thing we can do now is deal with the consequences. Are you really going to divorce her? Bradley sat down across from his daughter. Yes. Because you can't forgive her? Because she's not the woman I married anymore. And because staying with someone who betrayed our family would teach you that betrayal is acceptable. Kelly considered this. What if she gets help? Therapy or something. Therapy can't fix someone who doesn't believe they need fixing. Your mother still thinks Eddie genuinely cared about her. She still believes their relationship was real. Maybe it was real to her. Kelly, I need you to understand something. Love based on lies isn't love at all. It's manipulation. And your mother chose that manipulation over 23 years of marriage, over your security, over our family's safety. His daughter nodded slowly. I keep thinking about how we used to be, before everything went wrong. I think about that too. But that family doesn't exist anymore. Your mother made sure of that. So what happens now? Bradley reached across the table and took her hand. Now we build something new. Just you and me. And we make sure the people who hurt our family face the consequences of their choices. You mean Mom? I mean everyone who made this happen. Eddie's going to prison for a very long time. Your mother will face whatever justice the courts decide. And then we move forward. Without her. The finality in his voice seemed to convince Kelly that this wasn't a temporary separation or a dramatic gesture. This was the permanent end of their family as she'd known it. I love her, Dad. Even after everything. I know you do. And that's okay. But love doesn't mean accepting betrayal. It doesn't mean ignoring harm. Sometimes love means letting people face the consequences of their choices so they can learn from them. And if she learns, if she changes, Bradley squeezed his daughter's hand. Then maybe someday you can have a relationship with her again. But it will never be the same as it was. That night, Bradley sat in his office reviewing the divorce papers Jeff had prepared. Everything was straightforward, irreconcilable differences, with Bradley seeking full custody of Kelly and no alimony for Stephanie. By the time Stephanie was released from prison, Kelly would be in college. Their house would be sold, the proceeds divided according to the prenuptial agreement Stephanie had signed years earlier. Bradley's business accounts, protected by layers of corporate structure, would remain intact. Stephanie would leave prison with nothing but the clothes on her back and the knowledge that her choices had cost her everything she'd once held dear. It wasn't enough. Not yet. Bradley picked up his phone and dialed Miguel's number. I need you to dig deeper into Eddie's background, he said when Miguel answered. I want to know about every family he's destroyed, every woman he's conned. I want contact information for all of them. Planning something specific? Eddie's going to trial in 6 months. I want every one of his victims to be there to testify. I want his story to be told in full, with no detail left out. Including your wife's involvement? Especially my wife's involvement. She helped him, Miguel. She participated in his fraud. She deserves to face every woman whose life he ruined with her assistance. That's cold, boss. Even for you. Bradley's smile was sharp and empty. You haven't seen cold yet. When I'm finished, Eddie Alexander will be a cautionary tale that keeps con artists awake at night. And my wife will be remembered as the woman who helped him do it. What about Kelly? Kelly will learn that betrayal has consequences. And she'll never make the same mistakes her mother did. The trap was closing, but Bradley wasn't finished yet. Eddie's trial would be the final act in his revenge, and he intended to make it unforgettable. Chapter 6. The Web Titans. 3 months after Eddie's arrest, the scope of his crimes had expanded far beyond what anyone initially imagined. Federal investigators, armed with the evidence from his compromised laptop, had uncovered a network of fraud spanning 6 states and involving dozens of victims. Bradley stood in the FBI field office, reviewing victim statements with Special Agent Diana Graham. The stories were heartbreakingly similar. Lonely women targeted through veteran support groups, church communities, and online dating sites. Eddie had refined his approach over years, becoming a master manipulator who left financial and emotional devastation in his wake. Mrs. Hazel Frank from Phoenix lost her entire retirement savings, Agent Graham reported. $215,000 over 8 months. She mortgaged her house to give him more money. What's her situation now? Homeless, living with her sister. Too ashamed to tell her grown children what happened. Bradley felt the familiar cold anger building in his chest. She'll testify? Absolutely. Along with 17 other women who are eager to see him pay. What about my wife's role? Agent Graham's expression grew more serious. That's complicated. While Mrs. Knight clearly assisted in fraudulent applications and financial transfers, her attorneys are arguing she was a victim herself, manipulated into helping him. She wasn't manipulated. She was complicit. The evidence supports both interpretations. A jury could go either way. Bradley had expected this. Stephanie's lawyers would paint her as another victim, blinded by love and deceived by a master manipulator. It was a narrative that might work, despite the evidence of her active participation. How many charges is she facing? 3 counts of federal fraud, 2 counts of conspiracy. If convicted on all counts, she's looking at 8 to 12 years. The irony wasn't lost on Bradley. Stephanie might receive a harsher sentence than some of Eddie's other accomplices because she'd helped him target the veteran community specifically. Has she indicated any willingness to cooperate? Her attorneys reached out last week. They're interested in a plea deal. What are they offering? Full cooperation against Alexander. Complete testimony about his methods and the extent of his fraud network. In exchange, they want the charges reduced to misdemeanors with time served. Bradley considered this. Stephanie's testimony could ensure Eddie received the maximum sentence, but it would also allow her to escape serious consequences for her choices. What's your recommendation? Agent Graham studied him carefully. Professionally, take the deal. Her testimony could help us prosecute a dozen other cases and provide closure for victims. Personally, I understand why you might want her to face the full consequences of her actions. I need to think about it. Mr. Knight, can I speak frankly? Bradley nodded. I've been working fraud cases for 15 years. I've seen what these con artists do to families, how they destroy trust and relationships that took decades to build. What your wife did was wrong, but she wasn't the architect of this scheme. She was an adult who made conscious choices. Yes, but she was also a woman who was systematically manipulated by a professional predator. Sometimes the line between victim and accomplice isn't as clear as we'd like it to be. Bradley understood Agent Graham's perspective, but it didn't change his feelings about Stephanie's betrayal. Manipulation might explain her initial involvement, but it didn't excuse her continued participation once she understood what Eddie was doing. That evening, Bradley sat in his hotel room. He'd sold the family house immediately after Stephanie's arrest, reviewing the prosecution's case files. Every detail of Eddie's operation was laid out in meticulous detail, from his initial target selection through his final exit strategy. The man was indeed a professional. He researched his victims thoroughly, exploiting their vulnerabilities with surgical precision. Lonely military wives were a specialty because they combined emotional isolation with access to stable financial resources. But knowing Eddie's methods didn't excuse Stephanie's choices. She'd had multiple opportunities to recognize his deception and walk away. Instead, she'd chosen to help him, driven by emotions that prioritized her personal happiness over her family's well-being. Bradley's phone rang. Kelly was calling from her dorm room at college. She'd started her freshman year early, eager to escape the chaos surrounding her family's destruction. Dad, I saw the news about Mom's plea deal. Are you going to let her take it? That's not really my decision, sweetheart. It's up to the prosecutors. But they'll consider your opinion, right? Bradley paused. Yes, they will. What are you going to tell them? What do you think I should tell them? Kelly was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. Part of me wants her to pay for what she did. But part of me just wants this all to be over. And what does the bigger part want? I guess. I want her to understand what she did. Really understand. Not just the legal consequences, but how it affected us. How it affected me. Do you think she understands that now? I don't know. Her letters don't sound like she does. She still talks about Eddie like he was this tragic figure who made mistakes. She doesn't seem to get that he was a predator who used her to hurt other people. That confirmed Bradley's suspicions. Even after months in custody, even facing serious charges, Stephanie still hadn't accepted the reality of Eddie's manipulation or her own culpability. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think she'll ever really understand what she did wrong? Bradley considered the question carefully. I think she'll understand the legal consequences. I think she'll understand that she lost her family. But whether she'll understand the moral implications of her choices, I don't know. Would it change anything if she did? Not for our family, but it might help her avoid making similar mistakes in the future. You're never going to take her back, are you? No, Kelly. I'm not. Even if she changes? Even if she gets help? Some choices are permanent. Some betrayals can't be undone. What your mother did didn't just hurt me. It endangered you, destroyed our family's security, and helped a criminal hurt other innocent people. I understand, Kelly said quietly. I don't like it, but I understand. You don't have to like it, but you do need to learn from it. Learn what? That the people we choose to trust shape our lives in fundamental ways. That love without respect and loyalty is just emotion without substance. That actions have consequences that extend far beyond the people who make them. After hanging up, Bradley made his decision. He called Agent Graham and left a message. Regarding Mrs. Knight's plea deal, I recommend you reject it. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Miguel called with an update that shifted the entire landscape of the case. Boss, we got a problem. Or maybe an opportunity, depending on how you look at it. What is it? Eddie's talking. His lawyers reached out to the prosecution with their own deal. He's offering to give up his entire network, contacts, methods, victim lists, everything, in exchange for a reduced sentence. What's he asking for? 15 years instead of life. And protection in federal prison. Bradley felt his carefully laid plans shifting. Protection from whom? Turns out Eddie's been skimming money from his gambling associates. using victim funds to pay personal debts instead of what he owed them. They're not happy. How unhappy? Dead man walking unhappy. Word is there's a contract on him. This development changed everything. If Eddie received federal protection and a reduced sentence, he'd essentially escape the full consequences of his crimes. Worse, he'd likely be placed in minimum security, where he could continue manipulating people. Miguel, I need you to reach out to some of our old contacts. People who might have connections to Eddie's creditors. Boss, I'm not asking you to do anything illegal. I just want information about how serious this threat really is. And if it's serious, then maybe Eddie doesn't need federal protection as much as he thinks he does. Bradley was entering dangerous territory, but he'd passed the point of caring about legal niceties. Eddie Alexander had destroyed multiple families and was now trying to escape justice through manipulation and cooperation. Stephanie was preparing to minimize her own responsibility through plea bargaining. Neither of them seemed to understand that some actions carried consequences that couldn't be negotiated away. It was time to remind them both that Bradley Knight hadn't built his reputation by accepting defeat. The final phase of his revenge was about to begin. Chapter 7. Courtroom Revelations. 6 months after Eddie's arrest, the federal courthouse buzzed with activity as United States versus Edmund Alexander began. Bradley sat in the gallery's front row, flanked by 17 other victims whose lives Eddie had systematically destroyed. The prosecution had rejected both Eddie's and Stephanie's plea deals, opting instead for a public trial that would expose the full scope of the fraud network. Stephanie entered the courtroom in handcuffs, wearing a plain gray suit that made her look smaller and more vulnerable than Bradley remembered. She glanced at him once, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and desperation, but he didn't acknowledge her presence. Eddie Alexander looked nothing like the broken homeless veteran he'd portrayed. Clean-shaven and wearing an expensive suit, he resembled what he truly was, a calculating predator who had spent years perfecting his craft. His attorneys had arranged for the best defense money could buy, confident they could paint him as a victim of circumstances and addiction. Judge Jeff Rogers, Bradley's old Army buddy who had recused himself from the initial proceedings but returned when the case was reassigned, called the court to order. The irony of Jeff presiding over the case wasn't lost on Bradley. Sometimes the universe had a sense of justice. Your Honor, began federal prosecutor Sarah Savage, rising to deliver her opening statement. Over the next week, you will hear testimony about a criminal enterprise that specifically targeted the most vulnerable members of our military community. The defendant didn't just steal money. He stole hope, trust, and the dignity of families who had already sacrificed so much for our country. Sarah was another old acquaintance from Bradley's military days, and she'd taken the case personally. Her presentation was methodical and devastating, laying out Eddie's crimes with military precision. Edmund Alexander created an elaborate fiction, she continued. He posed as a decorated combat veteran, complete with fake records and stolen valor. He infiltrated veteran support groups, military family networks, and online communities dedicated to helping our heroes transition to civilian life. And he used these platforms to identify and exploit women whose husbands were deployed or frequently absent. The prosecutor clicked a remote, displaying a timeline on the courtroom screens. Over 3 years, the defendant stole over $800,000 from 19 confirmed victims. But the financial losses pale in comparison to the emotional and psychological damage he inflicted. Bradley watched as Sarah introduced each victim, their photographs and stories creating a devastating portrait of systematic abuse. Hazel Frank, the retired teacher who'd lost her life savings. Ruby Plummer, whose husband had died in Iraq and who'd trusted Eddie with her military death benefits. Olivia A. Bear, a young mother whose deployed husband had no idea his family was being manipulated. Each of these women believed they were helping a fellow American hero, Sarah explained. Instead, they were funding a criminal enterprise that preyed upon their patriotism and compassion. When Sarah reached Stephanie's case, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. Mrs. Stephanie Knight represents a different aspect of this crime. Unlike the other victims, Mrs. Knight became an active participant in the defendant's fraud, helping him target the veteran community and assisting in the completion of fraudulent benefit applications. The defense attorney, a slick corporate lawyer named Clarence Higgins, objected repeatedly during the prosecution's presentation, but Judge Rogers sustained very few of his challenges. The evidence was overwhelming and well documented. When Eddie took the stand in his own defense, Bradley leaned forward in anticipation. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, the chance to see Eddie Alexander try to justify his crimes in front of his victims. Mr. Alexander, defense attorney Higgins began. Can you tell the court about your background? I grew up in foster care, Eddie replied, his voice carefully modulated to convey vulnerability. Never knew my real parents. Bounced around between homes until I aged out of the system at 18. And what happened then? I struggled, Your Honor. No family support, no real education or job skills. I made mistakes, got into trouble, developed problems with gambling and alcohol. Bradley watched as Eddie painted himself as a victim of circumstances, a broken man driven to crime by desperation and addiction. It was a masterful performance, complete with tears and carefully timed emotional breaks. I never meant to hurt anyone, Eddie continued. I was just trying to survive. And when people showed me kindness, I took advantage of it. I'm not proud of what I did, but I was in a dark place. What about your relationship with Mrs. Knight? Eddie's expression grew more tender. Stephanie was different. She wasn't just another Mark. I genuinely cared about her. Even though your relationship was based on lies. The lies about my background, yes. But my feelings for her were real. She made me want to be a better person. Bradley felt his anger spike at Eddie's audacity. Even under oath, facing decades in prison, the man couldn't stop manipulating people. Did you intend for Mrs. Knight to become involved in your illegal activities? No, Eddie said firmly. She offered to help me with the VA applications because she wanted to help a fellow veteran. I should have stopped her, but I was selfish. I wanted her help, and I wanted her to feel needed. When Prosecutor Sarah Savage rose for cross-examination, her demeanor was ice-cold professional. Mr. Alexander, you testified that you never intended to hurt anyone. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. But you specifically researched your victims before approaching them, didn't you? I wanted to make sure they could afford to help. You researched their financial status, their family situations, their vulnerabilities. Correct, I suppose. Sarah pulled up documents on the courtroom screen. These are your personal notes about Mrs. Hazel Frank. You wrote, and I quote, lonely widow, substantial retirement savings, dead husband was Army sergeant, son lives across country and rarely visits. Does that sound like someone looking for help? Or someone looking for prey? Eddie's confident facade began to crack. I was just trying to understand her situation. Your notes about Mrs. Ruby Plummer state, military death benefits likely substantial, emotionally vulnerable, isolated from family support. Was that also you trying to understand her situation? I know how it looks, but, Mr. Alexander, did you ever serve in the United States military? No. Have you ever been to Afghanistan or Iraq? No. Did you receive any military training whatsoever? No. So when you told these women you were a combat veteran suffering from PTSD, you were lying? Yes. When you showed them fake military records and medals, you were committing stolen valor? Yes. And when Mrs. Knight helped you apply for veterans benefits that you knew you weren't entitled to, you allowed her to commit federal fraud on your behalf. Eddie's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The jury had seen through his victim act to the calculating predator beneath. I tried to stop her, Eddie insisted, but she wanted to help so badly. Mr. Alexander, did you provide detailed floor plans of the Knight family home to Brett Herrera and Wade Cardenas? That was never supposed to happen. They were just supposed to scare him, not hurt anyone. So you did plan to have the Knight family robbed and potentially kidnapped. Eddie's face went white as he realized his mistake. No, that's not what I meant. But it was too late. His own words had confirmed the prosecution's case about the planned home invasion. When Stephanie took the stand the next day, Bradley felt no sympathy for her obvious terror. She wore a simple blue dress and spoke in barely audible whispers. But her testimony was devastating to both her own case and Eddie's. Mrs. Knight, Prosecutor Savage began. How did you first meet Mr. Alexander? At a coffee shop near the VA office. He looked lost and confused, and I offered to help him find the Veterans Services office. What did he tell you about his military service? That he'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan. That he'd been wounded and was struggling with PTSD. That the VA system had failed him and he was homeless. Did you believe him? Completely. He knew details about military life, about deployment schedules. He seemed genuinely traumatized. When did your relationship with Mr. Alexander become romantic? Stephanie glanced at Bradley before answering. About 2 weeks after we met. He was staying at a shelter, and I offered to let him use our guest room while he got back on his feet. Did you tell your husband about this arrangement? No. Bradley was traveling for business, and I thought I could help Eddie get stabilized before he returned. When did you first provide money to Mr. Alexander? He needed clothes for job interviews, then money for a security deposit on an apartment, then medical expenses for his injuries. How much money did you give him in total? Approximately $60,000 over 3 months. The admission sent murmurs through the courtroom. Even Bradley hadn't realized the full extent of Stephanie's financial support. Did you help Mr. Alexander apply for veterans benefits? Yes. I drove him to appointments and helped him fill out paperwork. Did you know that he was not entitled to these benefits? Not at first. But Stephanie's voice trailed off. But what, Mrs. Knight? By the end, I suspected something wasn't right. Some of his stories didn't match up, but I was emotionally invested, and I didn't want to believe I'd been fooled. So you continued to help him even after you suspected he was lying? Yes. Why? Stephanie looked directly at Bradley for the first time since taking the stand. Because I was in love with him, or I thought I was, and because I was angry at my husband for always being absent. Did Mr. Alexander ever tell you about his plans to rob your home? No, never. I would never have allowed that. But you did give him detailed information about your family's routines, your husband's travel schedule, and your security system? He said he was worried about my safety when Bradley was out of town. I thought he was being protective. When Eddie's defense attorney cross-examined Stephanie, he tried to portray her as a willing accomplice who was now trying to minimize her responsibility. Mrs. Knight, you're facing federal charges yourself, aren't you? Yes. And you're hoping that your testimony here will help you receive a lighter sentence? I'm telling the truth. The truth is that you voluntarily gave Mr. Alexander $60,000, correct? Yes. You voluntarily helped him apply for benefits worth thousands more. Yes. You voluntarily provided him with intimate details about your family's life. Yes. And you did all of this while carrying on an extramarital affair that lasted 3 months. Yes. So you were an active, willing participant in everything that happened? Stephanie hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Bradley felt a grim satisfaction as his wife's own words confirmed her culpability. She hadn't been a helpless victim. She'd been a willing participant who'd prioritized her emotional needs over her family's safety. The trial continued for another day, with testimony from the other victims and expert witnesses about the psychological tactics used by con artists. But the outcome was never in doubt. The evidence was overwhelming, and both defendants had essentially confessed on the witness stand. As closing arguments began, Bradley prepared for the final phase of his revenge. The legal system would handle Eddie and Stephanie's criminal accountability, but Bradley had one more surprise planned for both of them. The time had come to place that final piece of paper on Judge Rogers' desk. Chapter 8. The Trap Springs. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all charges for both defendants. Eddie Alexander would spend the rest of his life in federal prison, while Stephanie faced 8 to 12 years behind bars. But Bradley's plan was just reaching its climax. As Judge Rogers prepared for the sentencing phase, scheduled for the following week, Bradley made his move. He requested a private meeting with the judge, claiming to have crucial information that could affect sentencing. This is highly irregular, Bradley, Judge Rogers said as they met in his chambers. You know I can't discuss an active case informally. Jeff, I need 5 minutes of your time. As an old friend, and as someone who's been investigating this case longer than the FBI. Judge Rogers studied his old Army buddy's face, recognizing something dangerous in his expression. What's this about? Bradley placed a thick manila envelope on the judge's desk. Information that changes everything about this case. What kind of information? The kind that shows this wasn't Eddie Alexander's first attempt at targeting my family. And it wasn't Stephanie's first betrayal either. Judge Rogers opened the envelope reluctantly, his expression growing more serious as he reviewed the contents. Bank records, phone logs, surveillance photographs, all dating back over a year before Eddie's official arrival in their lives. Jesus Christ, Bradley. What am I looking at? Evidence that my wife was working with Eddie Alexander for more than a year before I discovered their relationship. Evidence that they were planning this con from the beginning. The documents painted a devastating picture. Stephanie had been in contact with Eddie through social media for months before their supposed chance meeting at the coffee shop. She'd provided him with detailed information about Bradley's business, his travel schedule, and his financial assets long before Eddie ever posed as a homeless veteran. She wasn't a victim, Jeff. She was his inside source from day one. How did you get this information? I've been investigating since before his arrest. When I realized the timeline didn't add up, I dug deeper. Bradley pointed to specific documents. These phone records show calls between them dating back 18 months. These financial records show she was moving money into accounts Eddie could access long before their supposed first meeting. Why didn't you give this to the FBI? Because I wanted to see how far she'd take the victim act. I wanted to see if she'd tell the truth when given the chance. Judge Rogers continued reviewing the evidence, his expression growing grimmer. This suggests premeditation. If she was working with him from the beginning, then she wasn't manipulated into helping him. She was a willing conspirator who helped him target my family and my business specifically. And the other victims? She helped him research them too. Look at page 12. The document showed Stephanie's computer searches for information about military widows and deployed families in their area. She'd essentially provided Eddie with a target list. She used her connections in the military spouse community to identify vulnerable women. Then she and Eddie would manufacture chance meetings and begin their cons. Judge Rogers sat back in his chair, the implications sinking in. If this is true, then her entire testimony was perjury. Every word of it. She wasn't Eddie's victim. She was his partner. Bradley, this level of betrayal. Why didn't she just divorce you if she wanted out of the marriage? Because this way, she got to keep half of everything I'd built while also destroying my business reputation. Eddie wasn't just stealing money. He was planning to expose my client list and security protocols to criminal networks. Your business would have been finished. Completely. No one trusts a security company that can't protect its own family. Judge Rogers stood and walked to his window, staring out at the courthouse parking lot. What do you want me to do with this information? I want you to reopen the case. Charge her with perjury and conspiracy. Show the world who she really is. And if she agrees to cooperate fully, provides information about Eddie's network, then you'll have to decide if justice matters more than convenience. Judge Rogers turned back to face his old friend. This is personal for you, isn't it? Damn right it's personal. She didn't just betray our marriage. She betrayed every military family they targeted together. She used her position as a military spouse to help a criminal prey on other military families. All right, I'll review this with the prosecution. If the evidence supports your claims, we'll move forward. There's one more thing, Bradley said, pulling out a final document. I want to make a statement during the sentencing hearing. Victim impact statement. Something like that. Judge Rogers looked at the document Bradley handed him, a request to address the court during sentencing, with a brief outline of what he intended to say. You're going to destroy her completely, aren't you? I'm going to tell the truth. What happens to her after that is up to the justice system. 3 days later, the courtroom was packed for the sentencing hearing. Word had leaked that new evidence had emerged, and the media presence was overwhelming. Bradley sat in the front row, directly behind the prosecution table, as Judge Rogers called the court to order. Before we proceed with sentencing, the judge announced, the court has received new evidence that requires examination. The prosecution has filed additional charges against both defendants. Stephanie's face went white as the new charges were read. Conspiracy to commit fraud, racketeering, and perjury. Her attorney looked stunned, clearly blindsided by the developments. Prosecutor Sarah Savage stood to address the court. Your Honor, based on new evidence provided by the investigation, we now understand that this case involves a much more sophisticated criminal enterprise than originally believed. She outlined the evidence of Stephanie's long-term collaboration with Eddie, the premeditated nature of their plan, and the perjury committed during trial. Mrs. Knight wasn't a victim who became an accomplice, Sarah explained. She was a criminal conspirator from the beginning who helped target vulnerable military families for systematic exploitation. When it came time for victim impact statements, Bradley rose from his seat. The bailiff handed him a microphone, and he walked to the podium facing both defendants. Your Honor, my name is Bradley Knight. and I'm here to speak not just for myself, but for every military family that's been betrayed by these defendants." He looked directly at Stephanie, who couldn't meet his eyes. Stephanie Knight was my wife for 23 years. She was the mother of my daughter, my partner in building a life together. She knew the sacrifices military families make, the trust we place in our communities, the bonds that hold us together during deployments and hardships. Bradley's voice remained calm, but the emotion underneath was unmistakable. She used that knowledge, that trust, to help a criminal target the most vulnerable members of our community. She didn't just betray our marriage. She betrayed every family they destroyed together. He turned to address Eddie directly. "Mr. Alexander, you're a predator who chose to prey on people who had already sacrificed for their country. But you couldn't have done it without help from someone they trusted." Finally, Bradley looked back at Stephanie. "You made your choice when you decided to destroy our family for money. You made your choice when you helped target other military families. And you made your choice when you lied to this court about your involvement." Bradley reached into his jacket and pulled out a single sheet of paper, walking it to Judge Rogers' desk. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit this document to the court." Judge Rogers accepted the paper and read it, his expression growing stern. "What is this, Mr. Knight?" "It's a confession letter that my wife wrote to Eddie Alexander, dated 6 months before their supposed first meeting. In it, she outlines her plan to leave me for him and details my business operations, travel schedule, and financial assets." The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. Stephanie's attorney jumped to his feet with objections, but Judge Rogers silenced him with a glare. "In this letter," Bradley continued, "she specifically mentions her plan to take him for everything he's worth, and her excitement about starting a new life with Eddie using money stolen from my business." Stephanie began sobbing, but Bradley continued relentlessly. "She signed this letter, your loving partner in crime, forever yours, Stephanie." She knew exactly what she was doing, and she did it anyway. Bradley walked back to his seat as the courtroom buzzed with shocked conversation. Judge Rogers called for order before addressing both defendants. "In light of this new evidence, I'm postponing sentencing pending a full investigation into the perjury charges. Both defendants will remain in custody." As the bailiffs led Stephanie away, she looked back at Bradley one final time. In her eyes, he saw not remorse or regret, but pure hatred. The mask had finally fallen completely away. Eddie Alexander's confident facade had crumbled entirely. He now understood that Bradley Knight had been playing a longer game, setting traps that were only now fully springing closed. "Your Honor," Bradley called out as the session was ending. "Yes, Mr. Knight. I have one final statement to make." Judge Rogers nodded for him to proceed. Bradley stood and faced the entire courtroom, his voice carrying clearly to every corner. "To everyone here today, let this be a lesson. Betrayal has consequences. Those who choose to prey on military families, who choose to exploit the trust and sacrifice of our community, will be held accountable." He looked directly at Stephanie as she was led away in handcuffs. "No matter how long it takes, no matter what it costs, justice will be served." The courtroom fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. Bradley Knight had just demonstrated what happened when someone underestimated a man who never forgave and never forgot. But he wasn't finished yet. The final chapter of his revenge was still to come. Chapter 9, Final Justice. "He's just a homeless veteran." Stephanie's voice echoed through the packed courtroom as her carefully constructed defense collapsed around her. Judge Rogers had just denied her attorney's motion to suppress the confession letter, and the full scope of her betrayal was now public record. "My wife screamed in court," Bradley would later tell the reporter documenting the case. But as he placed that final piece of paper on Judge Rogers' desk, Stephanie's own handwritten confession of her criminal conspiracy, the judge's response was swift and final. "Lock the doors. No one leaves this room," Judge Rogers commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. The bailiffs immediately secured all exits as the judge prepared to address what had become the most significant fraud case in the district's history. Stephanie's lawyer, Sarah Savage, now representing her as a court-appointed attorney after she could no longer afford private counsel, turned away from her client in disgust. The evidence was overwhelming, and there was no defense against Stephanie's own written words. My wife trembled as the full weight of her situation became clear. The confession letter detailed not just her collaboration with Eddie, but her specific plan to manipulate Bradley into a vulnerable position where they could steal everything he'd built. And my daughter froze when she realized her mother had been planning this betrayal for over a year, using family information that Kelly herself had innocently provided during casual conversations. Mrs. Knight, Judge Rogers said, his voice heavy with disgust. In 30 years on this bench, I have never seen such a calculated betrayal of trust. You didn't just commit fraud. You weaponized your position as a military spouse to systematically destroy other military families. Bradley watched from the gallery as his wife of 23 years faced the consequences of her choices. There was no satisfaction in seeing her broken, only a cold sense of completion. Mr. Alexander, the judge continued, turning to Eddie, you are a predator who targeted the most vulnerable members of our society. But you could not have succeeded without the willing assistance of someone they trusted. Eddie's expensive suit couldn't hide the defeated slump of his shoulders. The man who had once manipulated women with practiced ease now looked exactly like what he was, a common criminal facing life in prison. Based on the evidence presented, Judge Rogers announced, I am sentencing Edmund Alexander to life in federal prison without possibility of parole. Additionally, he will be required to pay full restitution to all victims, and his assets will be liquidated to compensate the families he destroyed. Eddie's legs buckled, and he had to be supported by his attorney. Life without parole meant he would die in prison, far from the minimum security facility he'd hoped for through plea bargaining. Stephanie Knight, the judge continued, you face the additional charges of perjury, racketeering, and conspiracy. Your original plea deal is hereby voided. You will serve 25 years in federal prison, with possibility of parole after 15 years. Stephanie collapsed into her chair, the reality of her situation finally penetrating her denial. She would be nearly 60 when she became eligible for parole, and her daughter would be in her 30s. Furthermore, Judge Rogers added, you will forfeit all assets acquired during your marriage, which will be distributed among your victims as restitution. Your parental rights are hereby terminated, and you are prohibited from contacting your daughter until she reaches the age of majority and chooses to initiate contact herself. The termination of parental rights hit Stephanie harder than the prison sentence. She began sobbing uncontrollably as the full cost of her choices became clear. Bradley felt no sympathy. Kelly was better off without a mother who had been willing to destroy their family for money and fleeting romance. Mr. Knight, Judge Rogers called out, would you like to make a final statement? Bradley stood and walked to the podium one last time. The courtroom fell silent as he faced the two people who had tried to destroy everything he'd built. Your Honor, for months, these defendants attempted to portray themselves as victims of circumstance. Eddie Alexander claimed to be a broken veteran seeking help. Stephanie Knight claimed to be a lonely wife manipulated by a master criminal. He turned to look directly at both defendants. The truth is much simpler. They were partners in a criminal enterprise that targeted military families specifically because they believed our community's bonds of trust made us easy prey. Bradley's voice grew harder, more final. They were wrong. Military families understand loyalty, sacrifice, and the cost of betrayal better than most. And we understand that some actions have consequences that can never be undone. He looked at Stephanie one final time. You chose to betray 23 years of marriage, to endanger our daughter's safety, and to help a criminal prey on families whose only crime was offering help to someone they believed was a fellow veteran. You made that choice not once, but repeatedly, over the course of more than a year. Stephanie tried to speak, but her attorney restrained her. There is no apology that can undo what you've done. No rehabilitation that can restore the trust you've destroyed. You will serve every day of your sentence knowing that you chose this path willingly. Bradley turned back to Judge Rogers. Your Honor, justice has been served. These defendants will face the consequences of their choices, and our community is safer because of it. As Bradley returned to his seat, Judge Rogers delivered his final ruling. This case represents a fundamental betrayal of the values that bind our military community together. The defendants specifically targeted families who had already sacrificed for their country, exploiting their generosity and trust for personal gain. The judge's voice grew stern as he addressed the packed courtroom. Let this case serve as a warning to anyone who would prey upon military families. You will be caught, you will be prosecuted, and you will face the full weight of the law. The bonds that hold our military community together are not weaknesses to be exploited. They are strengths that will be used to protect the innocent and punish the guilty. After the sentencing, Bradley stood outside the courthouse with Kelly, who had flown in from college to witness the conclusion of their family's ordeal. The media swarmed around them, but Bradley declined to comment beyond a simple statement. Justice has been served. Our family can now move forward. Kelly was quieter, still processing the full scope of her mother's betrayal. Dad, do you think she'll ever understand what she did? Bradley considered the question as they walked to their car. I think she'll understand that her choices cost her everything. Whether she'll understand why they were wrong, that's up to her. Do you think she ever really loved us? I think she loved the idea of us. But love without loyalty, without sacrifice, without putting family first, that's not really love at all. Kelly nodded slowly. What happens now? Now we build something new. Just you and me. And we make sure this never happens to our family again. 6 months later, Bradley received a letter from Stephanie in prison. She was seeking forgiveness, claiming she'd finally understood her mistakes and wanted to rebuild their relationship. He read the letter once, then fed it to the shredder in his office. Miguel found him there an hour later, staring out the window at the city below. Boss, everything okay? Stephanie wants to reconcile. And some choices are permanent, Miguel. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. What about Kelly? She still asks about her mother sometimes. Bradley turned from the window. Kelly will make her own choices when she's ready. But she'll make them with full knowledge of what her mother did and why it was wrong. You never regret how you handled this. Bradley considered the question seriously. I regret that it was necessary. But I don't regret ensuring that Eddie and Stephanie faced the consequences of their choices. Even if it destroyed your family? Miguel, they destroyed my family the moment they chose crime and betrayal over loyalty and honesty. I just made sure they paid the price for it. 1 year after the trial, Kelly graduated from college with honors. She'd chosen a career in law enforcement, inspired by her father's pursuit of justice and her determination to protect other families from predators like Eddie Alexander. At her graduation ceremony, she gave a speech about the importance of loyalty, sacrifice, and holding people accountable for their choices. My father taught me that some principles are worth defending, no matter the cost, she said, looking directly at Bradley in the audience. He taught me that betrayal has consequences, that justice matters, and that protecting the innocent sometimes requires being ruthless with the guilty. After the ceremony, she found Bradley in the parking lot. Dad, I got a letter from Mom last week. Bradley tensed, but Kelly continued before he could respond. I threw it away without reading it. Just like you taught me, some choices are permanent. Bradley smiled and put his arm around his daughter. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. For throwing away the letter? For understanding why it was the right thing to do. As they drove home together, Bradley reflected on the past 2 years. Eddie Alexander would die in prison, having never successfully appealed his conviction. Stephanie would serve at least 15 years, and would emerge to find that the world had moved on without her. The other victims had received full restitution and had been able to rebuild their lives. The FBI had used Eddie's case to shut down an entire network of fake veteran scams, protecting countless future victims. Most importantly, Kelly had learned the hard lessons about trust, loyalty, and consequences that would guide her throughout her life. Bradley Knight had kept his promise. Betrayal had consequences, and those who chose to prey on military families had been held accountable. Justice had been served, completely and permanently. And in the end, that was all that mattered. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.